So welcome to this session on how I can lead my business when I've been made furlough myself. So really, we've been thinking mindset leadership around kind of the next phase of the whole coronavirus situation and thinking about ahead of next week when a lot of organizations that have previously been restricted trading are starting to move back into operations, and really wanted to start thinking into this next phase. So whether you are somebody who is already has been furloughed and you're thinking about kind of preparing yourself to come back, or whether you're in an organization that has had people furloughed and you'll be welcoming some of your colleagues back in the coming weeks, or wherever you are on that curve. You may be an organization that's not had to furlough people, but you just want to have more information about how to best lead through this time. That's what we put together. So we really wanted to kind of focus on this next phase. So we're kind of really focusing around kind of the changes in furlough and the opening up of or release of lockdown that's happening next week for a lot of hospitality businesses. Obviously, recently we've seen our retail establishments started to open up again, and some businesses have been trading for a little bit longer. So we wanted to pull all those kind of thoughts together and just create this session to hopefully help individuals who are in some way impacted by the situation, and to think around actually how do we fully integrate our teams post furlough arrangements. What we won't be doing today is going through technical information on the furlough scheme, because that's not my specialism. So we won't be kind of talking about the furlough scheme itself and its rules and processes. If there is something that you need some help with in that area, I do have a really good contact of mine who would, I'm sure, be happy to help. So please do drop me a note in the chat if you would benefit from some additional help and support in that area. And I can certainly put you in touch with my colleague, Joe Charles, who some of you may have been on the webinar that we shared together as well, where we talked through some of the kind of tricky conversation stuff. She's an expert in HR, and I'm sure she'd be happy to help. So this session is really about how do we lead through the process rather than the technicalities. I am recording the session, so we will send out a recording afterwards. So you can go back over this and you'll have access to that for as long as you need. And you can feel free to share that recording with any of your colleagues who you think might benefit from the session. You are all on mute for this session, but I do want to make it interactive, so I will be encouraging you to use the chat function to ask any questions as we go through. You can, at any point as we go through the session, please feel free to jump in and use the chat function to ask questions, and I will pause as we're going through and see what questions are coming in to make it as interactive as possible. We've also got some other ways that you can get engaged in the session today. So hopefully you'll be find this useful, and also have an opportunity to really kind of contribute to the session yourself. So please do feel free to use that chat functionality and engage with me as we're going through. So the first thing I'd like to kind of just know from those who are on the session now is just on the chat function, just kind of put your current situation and how you have been personally challenged by furlough. So what's your current situation, or what is your particular challenge when it comes to the whole furlough situation? So kind of what's your reason for being on the session this afternoon? So if you just want to jump over in the chat and just tell me what is the key thing that you're kind of your situation, or you're trying to get from the session this afternoon. What's the standout for you? So jump over on the chat and just let me know what it is that you've been affected, or how you've been affected, should I say, and what it is that you're looking to get from session this afternoon. So great. So we got one of the members of the team saying that they they're currently on furlough, have been mostly, and want to help their own reports and also guide their leadership colleague. Great stuff. Hopefully, again, this will help for that purpose. Anybody else got any kind of key things or situations that they want to just share? Again, if you choose panelists, only myself and Nicola, my business partner, will see the content, and I'll keep the names out of it. So when part-time furlough comes in, working how much I could furlough myself to save cost versus how much I can contribute. So great question, which we will definitely explore as we look into this. As I say, I won't go into the rules itself, but we can definitely look at how do we best balance those situations as we talk through. So keep those comments coming in. I'll keep an eye on it as we start to look into the session itself. So one of the things that we are really recognizing through talking to a lot of our clients is there is this concept of post-furlough anxiety. there is a real kind of concern out there for many people as to what the world is going to be like when they come back after what has been a very extended period of time away from the workplace. In fact, for many people, close friends of mine, close family of mine, and lots of our clients, they're saying that this is the longest time they spent away from work in the history of their working career. So many of them have been working for 30, 40 years and have never had such a length of time away from the job. And that creates its own kind of challenges. Great stuff, Sophie. Thanks for sharing that. So you're going back to work next week. After months away, so feeling anxious after a rocky few months. Yeah, absolutely. And you echo that thought there as to there are lots of people who are feeling that sense of anxiety as they come through. And there's lots of things contributing to that, of course there are. So we've obviously got the ongoing COVID situation and fear for our own safety and the safety of others, so safety of our teams around us. There's fear about how things have changed. So we know that the world itself has changed quite dramatically, but how is that going to affect the things that we once took for granted in our jobs? So there's a lot of fears around that. There's clearly concerns over financial situation. So, you know, one of our guests referencing that already had, you know, a redundancy situation, but luckily found a new role. But there are those concerns around what's the next phase and what does it mean for the business and what does it mean for job security? And again, there's that natural, even though it's not connected, I think many clients we're talking to is that natural connection. Does furlough mean that there are going to be some risks associated around redundancy? And of course, that's not what furlough was designed to do. It's designed to protect jobs, but there is this natural anxiety that many of your teams, if you're not feeling it yourself, many of your teams will be feeling. There is genuine concerns for people. Are they still able to do the job in the new world? So we know that businesses are under pressure. We know that there is lost revenue to catch up on, and there are many people who are saying that they're really concerned about, are they going to be able to cope with the pressures whilst they're operating in this new environment and getting used to it? And then people are worried about the status and how they'll be viewed because they're on furlough. And there is this kind of concern about how different people have been treated through the situation and what opportunities they've had to either do their job or not do their job. And does that create a difference of opinion from others around the business as well? And you've got this kind of almost, and I'll talk a little bit more about it in a while, but this almost division that the situation has sometimes created. So I'm just going to launch a quick poll just to see kind of how confident do you feel about your team returning to work? And of course, you can reflect this on yourself, but also thinking about your own team. So I'm just going to launch the poll and just let me know how you're feeling about the current the change. And if you are going back to work in the non too distant future, what is your kind of level of concern or worry around the situation? Are you panicking? Are you slightly worried? Are you neither worried nor confident? Confident you'll cope and have complete confidence. So how would you you rate yourself against the poll there? So I'll just wait for people to just come in and place their votes. Okay, so it's looking at, as we can see the results coming in there, that got an individual who's slightly worried about the situation, and a couple of people saying they're confident to cope. So there is this definite feeling of sense that I'm getting from our clients that we work with is nobody's in this fully confident position where everything is going to be fine, and we're not getting a huge amount of kind of panic reaction, but there is this middle ground of people having certain concerns and feelings around the situation and wanting to just really make sure that they're doing everything they can to ease through the process coming back into the workplace. And as I mentioned earlier, one area that there is a real concern, may not be quite so explicit for many, is this kind of concept or fear of stigma being attached to those who are on furlough. This can be especially challenging in business where some people have been on furlough and others haven't. So you've got this real kind of almost two classes within the business, if I want to use a word that's that strong, where you've got people who have been working throughout and of course have then been working hard because they've had to take on responsibilities from other people. So those people have are really kind of dealing with the exhaustion of having to work through that period and having little time off and little downtime, but still trying to cope. And then you've got the people who've been on furlough, who the majority feel really guilty for the fact that they've not been able to work and have wanted to contribute more, but have not found themselves able to contribute more. And you've got this real potential division that might be happening. So one of the key challenges we move into this next phase is how do we successfully integrate our teams back together, where we can recognize the contributions of each person to the business. And an important point just to remember on this is those people who are on furlough, again, we can sometimes look into their Facebook or their social media, and it might look like they've been having a great time. But really, as we know in life in general, what happens on social media doesn't necessarily represent what happens in real life. And many of those people might have been making the most of the sunshine earlier on in the year, but that didn't stop the fact that they were having some really quite anxious thoughts about their inability to contribute to the business. And of course, they had no choice, so they contributed to the success of the business coming through it through staying at home. And we shouldn't lose sight of that, as well as recognizing the people who have done work throughout and have been kind of directly contributing to the business. So we've got this real potential for a two-tier type system coming in, and it's something we really need to be aware of as we start to move into bringing our teams together. Is how are we going to fully integrate those teams, and how are we going to deal with any potential conflicts that might exist because of comments that are made that are not really meant to be critical, but maybe perceived and received that way by the others. So there are potential flashpoints that we just need to think about as we go into this next phase of the response. So let's start talking about how best we can lead others through this challenging time. And I want to start with a principle that is important in leadership at all times, but I think is doubly important right now. So something we really need to be thinking into as we go through this next stage of our response. So I'm sure, I said you will, I'm sure all have been on an airplane and so can relate to the safety briefing. You all know that in the unlikely event of a plane suffering a loss of pressure, oxygen masks will drop down from the ceiling above. Pull the mask towards you, place over the nose and mouth and breathe normally. We've all heard that many, many times. But now comes the kicker. Please ensure you place your own mask on before helping others with theirs. This is perhaps one of the most important pieces of advice for anyone in any situation. We cannot help others if we can't help ourselves. So if we want to be at our best to help others through this process of coming back into the workplace after the furlough period or the lockdown period, we've got to make sure we're taking care of ourselves first of all. And one of the things I want to just really make sure you receive and think into is you cannot give what you don't have. So let me repeat that. You cannot give to somebody else what you don't have for yourself. So if you aren't taking care of your own well-being, your own response to the situation, if you aren't placing your own oxygen mask on first, it's impossible for us to help others. So we need to really think about that. So as we go back into our workplaces, we will have others looking for us to help, and the temptation will be for us to reach out and want to help them. But we can't do this if we're not looking after ourselves first. So many people who are leaders of teams will kind of do anything to support their teams. And the natural inclination is to want to kind of become the savior and reach out and help people who are struggling as they come back into the workplace. But we can only do that effectively if we've taken the time for ourselves. So what do we need to do in practice? We need to allow times for ourselves to adjust to the situation. We need to allow that we might not have all the answers. We need to get comfortable with not knowing. And again, that can be a really uncomfortable place for managers to be. And what's driving a lot of anxiety that I'm talking to of people returning back into the workplace is they are concerned about not knowing. Things have changed since they were last in the workplace and they're out of the loop. You hear that phrase a lot. So we need to start getting comfortable with not knowing, not being expected to have all the answers. We need to deal with our own emotional state. We need to address our own feelings of anxiety, our own fears before we focus on everyone else. And we need to seek out the support and not fear showing that we are struggling. It is perfectly reasonable and normal for us to be challenged in the first 2 to 3 weeks as we go back into the workplace to cope with the changes that are happening And we shouldn't feel uncomfortable with sharing some of those concerns that we might have with our leadership teams around us, and try and create an open conversation about some of the challenges that are going on. It is much more important for us to be open to others around us and sharing information with them and having that dialogue than it is to keep it all kind of locked in and not really sharing it. So making the conversation, and your role as leaders to help promote that conversation that supports us to be effective in terms of thinking about that next step of our reaction and responses and how we're feeling about things. So we've all seen the change curve, and certainly people who've been on some of the previous webinars, we'll have shared some of this. So we know that there is a change curve in whatever guise, and you can use whichever format of the change curve you like. But we all know that coronavirus impacted many. The sudden enforced change to the way we were living for many on this call included being put in a position of furlough or even in positions of redundancy situations. The key thing is that for many, we're about to enter yet another change curve. And in my belief, this actually might be an even bigger and more challenging curve to respond to. And I'll explain that a little bit more. So when we think about the response to COVID when we went into lockdown back in mid-March, which seems an awful long time ago now, everybody was in the same boat. We were all suddenly forced to either shut down our businesses and not stop trading, or to go to a place where we were trading in a very different way and working in a very different way. Moving to working from our dining room tables whilst we've got our children around us homeschooling, dealing with changes to the way that we do everything in our life. But it was all sudden and everybody was in the same situation. We didn't have any predetermined habits that were preparing us for it. So we all had to start from scratch pretty much. So we went into this place where it happened suddenly, and we had to just adapt and cope with whatever was going on, and we found a way through it. So we went through the curve. We got some kind of lack of concern. We had some denial. We had some feelings of kind of doom and gloom, and then we got through acceptance. And most of us have got to a place where we're actually pretty well through, and we started to really get used to the situation that we're in, started to integrate it, and we're now at a place where actually we've formed some brand new habits that are helping us to work effectively in the difficult situation that we find ourselves in and coping with all the situations around us. So many people are saying that they're now in kind of stage six or stage 7 of that curve, and they feel, whilst they might be a bit jaded from working from home because it's challenging, they certainly feel like they've kind of overcome the ways of working piece. So we've had enough time away that we've created those new habits. But then comes the announcement that we can go back to our workplaces. For many, it's been eagerly awaited, but the minute it happens, we suddenly have this kind of response to that situation. And what we typically were likely to see is then the start of a second change curve. Coming in where we are currently at, whether we're at 6 or 7 currently on the old curve, we're now starting to see this second curve. So how did you feel when you heard it? Were you happy? Were you relieved to hear that you could finally go back into the workplace? Or did you have a moment of happiness and then the anxiety has settled in that we've kind of referenced already? As we start to think about going into the workplace that are opening up next week, if you're in the hospitality sector, is there an element of kind of those uncomfortable feelings in the stomach, of that anxiety as we start to move back into the workplace? Again, feel free to make some comments on chat just as to kind of how you're feeling about that situation. But the key challenge around this next phase is that we're going to be going back into our old places of work for many. Some of you will be starting a new job in a new location, which actually gives you an opportunity for a fresh start. But for many of us, we'll be going back into our old offices, into our old workplaces, our old restaurant shops, places where we've worked. And even if you are going to be working somewhat from home, but doing some time in the offices, again, we will still be going back into familiar places. And whilst the building might look the same on the outside, everything about it is going to be different. So even though the structure itself will look very familiar, what goes on within that structure is going to be very different. And our brains are going to be really, really challenged by this. So our brains love patterns. If we look at a neurological level, our brains operate through seeing patterns. It's why we can remember somebody's face much more effectively than remembering their name. We just remember the patterns of their features. In fact, without pattern recognition, we would be overloaded in seconds and our brains would shut down. So we rely on patterns to help us to process information. So when we go somewhere that looks familiar, our brain will kick out its automated responses to the way that we do everyday tasks. So we walk into our office that's very familiar, or our hospitality venue, or our shop, or wherever it is. We walk in and we've got this instant pattern recognition. And then we sit down at our desk and then we start to see the partitions that might be in place. So we might just start to see the kind of the stickers that have been placed around social distancing, or things that have moved and changed because we have to refit offices out to make it work in the current situation. And our brain is having to not just process the fact that we've got this pattern that we want to stay the same, but there's these slight changes to the way that we're doing things. And when we start to focus on these patterns, our brain wants to operate in the way that it always has. Our brain is designed to do things in the most simple way possible. These spatial anchors can be really super powerful. So when I do coaching with clients, one of the things that I do is and if I want to change the way that they're thinking, I always take them out of their environment that they normally operate in the workplace, to remove the spatial anchor that connects them. Because what I know as a coach is, if I'm coaching you and you're at your desk, whilst you may be talking about change and processing things in a different way, your spatial anchors are locking your thinking into the way that you operate in the place of your work. And this phenomenon will be happening when we start going back into our workplaces for those who are returning back to an office that they've known before. And the real challenge of that is we've got our habits that are sitting underneath the surface that we never get rid of. They're always there. And those habits are trying their hardest to come back into operation. We will just desire to do the job how we've always done it. And the reality is we're not going to be able to. We're never going to be able to do the job the way we've always done it, or very unlikely that that's going to happen. So we're going to have to deal with not just the reaction to being back in the workplace, being around colleagues again, and the relationship side, but we're also going to have this habit system underneath that's driving us to want to do things the same, yet we've got a whole host of new processes that we're going to have to learn and develop and assimilate into our way of working. And it is going to cause an inner conflict between what we have always done versus what we're now going to do. And it's this reason why I believe the challenge of coming back into the workplace is significantly harder than the challenge of removing yourselves from the workplace in the first place. So because we're coming back, we're trying to overprint habits that already exist, it's much more difficult than it is just starting from scratch. So we've got many layers. We've got anxiety about coming back and being around people caused by COVID and other situations. We've got some concerns around our business, and we've also got then this reaction response to the habits that we formed previously that we're going to have to overprint. Great to see a comment from Caroline there about kept active learning and reading whilst on furlough, so it's not as daunting as if I'd stopped completely, which is a great thing to share. What I'd love you to do is, if you can just go into your toolbar, you should see a more options or view options tab, and you should be able to click on that and bring up the annotate tool. So on the annotate tool, you should be able to find, hopefully, that tool coming up there. And if you can just take the draw icon, select the draw icon, pick a color, and I just want you to put a cross or put a circle as to where you think you might be on this change curve. So whereabouts are you as we go back into kind of reassimilating ourselves back into the workplace and finding the new normal? Where do you see yourself? So I might, for instance, pick out that I'm going to be around here, but where do you put yourself? You should have the view options tool if you are on a desktop version. If you're on a mobile version, you may not, but if you're on desktop, it should be in the view options. It's one of the drop down tools that you've got in the view options space. Doesn't matter if you can't find it. It's not an issue. You can always use the chat function and just say where you think you are using the chat if that works better for you. So say either use the chat, or if you can find the annotate tool, it should be, say, view options either in your toolbar at the bottom or top of the screen, depending on your version. And you can then pick out an icon and draw that. Okay, so level 4 on the second curve, so the acceptance part. Great, thank you. Anybody else got a view as to where they might see themselves at the moment on the curve? So again, acceptance on the second curve, great. So we're now into that place of we're accepting that this change is happening, but we just want to now start to test and start to see how it's going to work for us. Great stuff. Thank you for sharing those thoughts. So let's just see what we can do to help as our teams come back in, and what we can do individually and personally to support as we go through this next phase. Well, one of the things that I think it's really important for us to think about as a leader post-furlough is to really think about as if you are starting a new job, because ultimately you kind of are. And if we go in with the attitude of finding a new job, psychologically, it helps us to prepare ourselves for the next phase. So whether you are in a new job, which I know in the case of Sophie, she is in that place, but if not, if you're still going to do the same role that you were doing previously, or you've got people in your team who are doing the same roles, just really approach it as if you've got somebody either new into their role if they're in your team, or you personally are new into that job. And the reason I say that is because psychologically, if we approach things as if it's a new job, we change the anxiety to be kind of excitement and enthusiasm. And we give ourselves a bit of a break, a mental, psychological break that says we don't need to know everything straight away because we're new to it. And the reality is the job, whilst you may have done it for a number of years, the job in the new world is going to be new. And therefore, there are things we're going to need to learn. So when we start thinking about starting a new job, we need to think, we need to consider things like, let's accept that nerves and anxiety are normal. Just like when you start a new job, you're going to be nervous. That is perfectly normal. It's not something for us to get concerned about. When you start a new job, you have to take some time to orientate yourself. So you have that orientation period that we would normally have if you're starting a new role, and you need to find out how things work. Again, expect the same thing when you go back into your workplace. You're going to need time to learn the new process and new ways of doing things. If you've been on furlough, you've not been able to access emails on a regular basis. You might have seen some communications, but you're probably not seeing the day-to-day emails. So therefore, you are going to feel a little bit out of the loop, and it is going to feel like there are things that have happened that you don't know about. And that's fine. Again, it's just like going into a new company. We're going to then start to discover from day one, although the ability to assimilate that information is going to be much more rapid because you have some familiarity with the company. We need to let go of the old job. Again, really critical. If you have changed jobs, those people who hanker back to their previous existence, keep thinking back to their previous job that they were doing before they started a new job, they typically really struggle to get involved in the new role, and they typically struggle to get involved in the new culture of their business. So if we go in with an approach in that, so this is a fresh new start, it's an ability for me to look at the job in a completely different way and to really just cope with the changes. And I'm not trying to replicate what I used to do before, and not hankering for, I wish it was like it was previously. I want the old normal to come back. Again, from a psychological perspective, it helps us to really assimilate information much more rapidly, because we're not having this internal fight between this has changed. We can just go, okay, this is new. This is the way we do it around here. This is great. I can start to work on that. Take time before making any real changes. Just like when you start a new job, you're going to spot things that could be improved, but it's always a good idea to sit back and observe, even for just a few days. Every business has going to have made rapid changes to the way they operate to respond to the COVID situation. Many of those decisions will have been made on the fly without any kind of blueprint to follow. And many of those decisions may not be the most optimal decision in the long run. So you're going to go back and you're going to see things that are just a bit awkward. You're going to see things that just have been decided on, but actually in reality, they aren't a long-term solution. And the danger is we go straight back in with a kind of real energy to want to go and get back to normal. And we then start changing things left, right, and center. And again, this is where we might start seeing some friction happen with people who've been working throughout, who've been kind of trying to adapt as best they can to the situation, have made decisions in the most positive of intentions, but those decisions may not be the most effective. And again, if we go straight in there and say, well, why are we doing it this way? That's ridiculous. We need to change this. We need to change that. From morning one of our new start in the role, we are likely to cause some friction. And of course, we've not had a chance to really understand the situation for ourselves either. So thinking about that, just taking time, easing yourself back in is really important. And then the final one, a tip again, as to thinking like it's a new job, is we need to build relationships. Like a new job, you need to first strive to make connections. You need to reconnect with team members that you may not have physically seen for many months. Yes, we've had Zoom, we've been able to connect through forums like this, but we haven't been able to be in the kind of same workplace as people. We haven't been maybe to have the facility to have some of the deeper conversations that we would have liked to have, or we would normally have face to face. So we need to take our time to really build those relationships, just like you would if you were going into a new job again. So my advice to you, if you are in that situation, being on furlough, a couple of people are in that situation, then use this. If you are somebody who has perhaps been working through, but you're looking at how to manage your team through this, it's then thinking about, okay, how can I encourage my team members to feel about this or approach it as if it was a new job for them? The next thing I just want to talk about is the importance of connection. I mentioned it as kind of the fifth point on the new job element there, but I really want to focus on the most important thing that you can do, either as you're returning to the workplace or leading others through the situation, is to ramp up our connection, to really invest time and energy to build real strong connections and reconnect where need be to the teams who we are working around. Your team are going to want to feel safe, both physically, protected from the virus, protected in the environment they're in, but also psychologically. They want to know that they are trusted. They want to know that they are in a position where their ideas matter and they count. And they want to know that they're not going to be put under undue pressure to come straight and expect to be 100 miles an hour straight away. So we need to make sure that we are really investing time to reconnect with people, rebuild those relationships, particularly again between this integration of furlough, non-furlough workers, to really build those connections, to know that you've been in it together as a combined team, and you are one team rather than two divisive groups who have approached things from a different way. When we get our teams back together, they're all going to be in different places. Some will be blasé about coming back to work, and some might be really worried. Some will have enjoyed being on lockdown and furlough, and many won't. Team members who've had to work throughout may have very different views to those who didn't. Everybody's experience is going to be very different, and we need to really open our ears and tune in to what's going on with our team in this period. Don't assume everybody feels the same as you. This is when we need to dial up the empathy and spend time really understanding those around us. Remember this, people don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. So again, I'll repeat that. People don't care how much you know until they know how much you care. If you are just straight back into the task focus, wanting to organize processes and systems, and you don't take any time for the personal human side of it, then your team are going to recognize that they're just not that important to you. And I'm going to talk a little bit about changing expectations as we move through. So remember, as you race back and focus on getting back into the place that you know, and you can be the all-knowing super manager, nobody's going to care how much you know if you're not showing that you care about them. And many of your team are going to fundamentally change their view of what matters in the past few months. When we've all been through a situation like the recent months, it makes us reassess what matters. We start to gain gratitude for some of the most basic things, and we start to challenge how important other things are to us. What people once accepted may no longer accept. What they wanted from their career might not now seem so important. Everybody's going to be looking for their own sense of meaning because of what has happened, has perhaps shaken the very beliefs in what it means to live. For many, it's that important. All the things we've taken for granted for years like the opportunity to just go into a supermarket whenever we want to, or to go into our local shopping centre and buy something nice for ourselves. All of those things have been taken away quite dramatically, and it's made us reassess what matters most. And I don't want you to underestimate the impact this is having for yourself to really tune into it, but also for people in your teams who you're leading. We've got to get used to a new way of working, or in many cases, an enforced way of not working. For many people, this may be the first time to say that they've not worked for a long time. So people have changed, expectations have changed, what they see and want from work will have changed, the attitude towards flexible working may have changed, the expectation around flexible working may have changed. So we need to be ready for many conversations for ourselves to have, but also for our teams to have, around what are they looking for moving forward. And again, if we can be really open with those conversations, really transparent, and really try and understand and have empathy. Doesn't mean we have to give everybody exactly what they want, but we do need to be spending time really understanding and seeing how we can accommodate as best we can some of those expectations that people have, because it will have changed for many. Some people will feel exactly the same and it won't have changed, but for many it will absolutely have changed. The other thing I just want to talk about as we kind of move towards the close of the session is to really think around this concept of VUCA. So VUCA is a phrase or an acronym that's been used and coined in the US military, and now is used in a lot of military situations, and has become kind of prevalent in business as well. And it stands for volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. So just like this image that you can see, it's highly confusing and highly complicated. So when we are operating in a highly volatile VUCA world and the environments that creates, it's very easy to feel bewildered and overwhelmed, and often we simply freeze because we can't process everything that's happening. This is typically what it feels like. If you're in this highly volatile situation, often our instant reaction is, I'm just going to freeze and stop because I can't cope with all of the different complexities that are happening. And that's the worst thing that we can do. The key in a VUCA environment is to focus on what we can control. So amongst all of this confusion that you can see on the screen there, what's the one thing that I do have certainty over? What are the things that I can claim control over and apply myself to in order to navigate my way forward? We need to take action on the things that are within our grasp and to make decisions that feel right in the moment without worrying too much about the bigger picture. We have to rapidly assess the information we have available to us, review the data and proceed, and then act. So when I created Micro Leadership, which is the book I wrote in 2018, I had in my mind this concept of a VUCA world. But little did I know how quickly this VUCA world would have arrived in every single organization on the planet. You know, we started to see lots of businesses moving to becoming constantly more complex matrix management structures, but there were still very many traditional organizations that were operating in this kind of belief of certainty. And of course, COVID came along and wiped out that certainty overnight and created this highly volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous world that we are now operating in. And we needed some principles to help us lead through that. So micro leadership is all about the small yet significant changes that we can make day by day to manage the uncertainty of a VUCA world and to effectively make decisions. In the post-COVID world, we are all going to be forced to make repeated situations and decisions where we have no preferred way of doing things. As I say, the blueprint that we are perhaps guided by, the principles and the operating manuals that we've had in our businesses, we've kind of had to rip away, chuck away the rule book, and we're making it up as we go along in many cases. If we look at that at the macro level in the political situation, look at how the government has been having to respond to a very dynamic, changing situation, using the science as a guide and the data as best they could to try and make decisions to navigate their way through this. And again, we can have our own views to how successful or not successful that's been, but it's a great example of how do we lead through a VUCA environment when we have no set blueprint. We can look at what other countries have done, other nations' responses, but when we're forced to make the decisions, how best do we apply them? And you'll have had the same looking at your businesses from afar if you've been on furlough, or if you've been involved in the business, you've been active in those processes. So when I looked around, how do we lead in this really uncertain environment, there were 6 key principles that I identified with leaders who were very effective at doing this. The first of those principles is what I call living the gap. So living the gap is our ability to spot the opportunities that exist when you are in a uncertain environment. Whenever there's uncertainty, there will always be opportunities, and the ability to keep ourselves focused on opportunity rather than on the change is really critical. So the ability to forecast, to prepare yourself to be in the right position at the right time, to maximize opportunities is one of the real habits that people who thrive in uncertain situations adopt. They do enough work in advance. And one of the things I share on my 66-day leadership challenge is this combination of wisdom and imagination. But great people in this place use their wisdom, their experience, plus their ability to foresee and to imagine, to get themselves in the right position at the right time. So the first area that great leaders utilize in this VUCA world is this concept of living the gap, the ability to manage their reactions and responses to what's happening around them and not be driven by the stimulus, to create an element of disassociation from what's happening so I can make objective decisions rather than emotionally charged decisions that potentially could lead me to more dangerous situations. Again, if we go back to the military, they work on this all the time. What they want to have is devolved decision making, so individuals in the field of war can make a decision that's theirs to make, knowing that they've done the training and the practice that they're more likely to make an effective decision that's going to be cause them to stay safe or to achieve the objectives that they're trying to achieve. But it's the wisdom behind and then the imagination to see what's really important. So the first one is that live in the gap. Second one is be a connector. We've talked about connection already, but be a connector is our ability to draw together the needs of people, processes, and systems to make sure that we create this effective network that enables us to enact the opportunities that come our way. So it's great to spot opportunities, but if we can't align people, if we can't connect them to a system or a process, we can't knit things together, then we often miss out on those opportunities because we're too slow and indecisive to move. Again, when we're in this uncertain environment, we need to really strengthen the connections to the people we have got a connection to. And we also need to make sure that we are constantly evaluating our systems to ensure that they are appropriate for the next phase that we're moving through. We might have some old rule books that were drawn up 5 years ago that are just no longer credible in this current world. And the Be a Connector is able to see what's happening in the outside world on the horizon. What have we got going on internally? What are our people saying? Connect more together to a way that can move you forward. The third area that we work with people around and concept is this concept of find a way, this ability to stay optimistic. Optimism is a significantly important psychological framework. And really, if you think about optimism, optimism is that there is a better way, there is a more optimal future that we can achieve. And if you kind of have the view that I'm not optimistic, then why would you ever keep working at something? Why would you keep bashing your head against a brick wall if you don't believe that in some way you're going to be able to get around that brick wall or through it and work towards a better future? So optimism, whilst it can be overdone, is actually a really strong psychological framework for us to persist in difficult times. When we're in uncertainty, there is going to be no clear ways. You are often going to find hurdles in your way. There can be obstacles, things that you can't do the way you thought you would do them. And it's that willingness to be creative, to be innovative, but just to be resilient and to keep going in the face of adversity is really important in uncertain times. We'll gain confidence every time we make a good decision, but every time that something doesn't quite go according to plan, which is going to happen more often because there is lack of certainty, we need to have that inner store of confidence and resilience to help us to cope with it. So the next phase or next area that we look at is this concept of find a way. Fourth one is dare to fail. Dare to fail is this willingness to take chances, to take risks, to control the things that we do have control over, but to step forward with confidence, knowing that we don't know the full answers, but still being willing to take the first step. You know, you've got that classic quote of, you may not see the top of the staircase, but as long as you can see the first step, you need to take that first step. It's the same with dare to fail. We may not know where it's going to lead to, but we've got to have the confidence to try the first one. If it doesn't work out, then what do we learn from it, and how do we implement that learning back into our systems to ensure that we can keep moving forward? Iteration is going to be critically important as we move through into our businesses. For those who are great to have a vision to know where we're trying to get to, but to really realize that we've got to adapt our strategies as we go. So going out and setting a plan that's going to be the same for the next 3 years is very unlikely. And again, COVID has proven that. So we need to have a plan, definitely. We need to create a strategy, but we've got to have that flexibility and agility to respond to the strategy as we're going. That ability to be nimble as we're moving through, to iterate, to learn, and then to change and go. Fifth area is what we call show up. This is the habit of making decisions when you need to. So there are times as a leader we need to put our lovely cycling phrase, we need to put our nose into the wind, to take responsibility and ownership for what's happening, and to really step forward and be decisive. So when we've seen the opportunities from living the gap, we then need to take responsibility for pushing through those opportunities. But it's also about being really clear with our expectations. It's about taking control of the situations that are ours to control, giving real clarity to people around us. So one of the biggest challenges for everybody working in this environment is uncertainty. The more certain we can be as a leader, and that certainty may not be that I know exactly what's going to happen in the future, but I'm certain if I take this next step, then that's going to lead us somewhere closer. Even if it's a micro level of certainty, it's taking that full first step and having the confidence to just step forward and do it, which is the habit around show up. It's the taking responsibility, taking action, being focused on what you can do wrong, what you can't do, and being willing to really recognize who you are as a leader and really owning that space so you have the confidence to step forward. And then the final habit within the six is this concept of live to serve. How do we apply everything that we do as a leader in the service of those around us, whether they be our clients or whether they be our internal clients, our teams? But this whole attitude around gratitude is at the base of the live to serve habit. Being grateful for everything that's happening around us, even when we're in the most difficult of times that cause anxiety, recognizing the things that we can be grateful for and then really focusing helps us to sustain our ability to thrive when we're in this period of uncertainty. So the live to serve habit is a great, again, psychological framework that we can utilize that stops us from getting overwhelmed by the uncertainty and starts to give us something we can draw on that gives us a sense of control in the situation. So those are the 6 habits. We are going to be launching our next 66-day leadership challenge, which is a 9-week virtual leadership event that will help to combine the understanding of how to develop and apply these habits into your leadership practice. It's going to be combining live teaching and which is a weekly live call with myself, where I really delve into these in a lot more detail. Plus, we have some weekly challenges that you'll systematically learn how to make the small changes to the way that you lead and create a framework that, when followed and applied, will help you to create and lead teams who are motivated, innovative, collaborative, resilient, and deliver outstanding results, which ultimately is what we're trying to achieve as we go through situations of uncertainty. So thank you for your time. I'm just going to open up for any questions that anybody might have and that they want to share with us. So again, if you want to use the chat function, or you can use the actually, a chat function will be the best way to just any questions that anybody's got that they want to ask about anything we shared or any personal situation. So I think my Wi-Fi may have dropped out there. So any questions that you've got, please feel free to ping them over, and I'd be happy to take them and answer any questions. Again, anything that's personal to your circumstance that we've not picked up as we've gone through. Whilst I'm conscious we've not kind of talked specifically about the part-time furlough and whether you can focus on that contribution. I think the critical thing with that is what's going to add the most value. Is it the cost saving is going to add the most value, or is it the influence and idea generation and the iteration that you can create whilst you're in the workplace? It would be the thing that I would be balancing out as I make those decisions or choices around whether I part furlough or not. It's really what are you giving up by not being there would be the question that I would be asking the question, and how much is that worth? and that's something for you to get to think into. Say any other. Great stuff. Thank you, Caroline. That's I appreciate you've got some stuff there. Yeah, we've got actually on the managing remote teams. I'm currently doing a series of emails. So if you're in our mailing list, we are doing our top tips. So we did our first at the weekend, and we will be doing another tip. Will go out later today. And each day we're just going to do a different tip on managing remote teams. So one a day for the next kind of few emails, just to give you some ideas. So look out for those on our mailing list. Obviously, by registering to this today, you will automatically be on our mailing list. So look out for those coming through. And of course, if you want to hear any more details, then just by all means, give me a shout. You may also want to check out, we did do a webinar on managing in the matrix, which I'm not sure if you were on. But again, if not, drop me a note and I can happily send you the link to the managing the matrix webinar that we ran. Yep, I will absolutely. Yeah, I'll ping you that link later on today, so you've got access to that. Again, any more questions from anybody? If not, great to have seen you. Hope you've enjoyed the session, and we'll look forward to welcoming you on another one of our sessions coming up. We will be sending out details about the next 66-day challenge. I would thoroughly recommend it. We've got some great results on our current challenge that we're running at the moment. People really kind of shifting the cultures of their teams and their business and creating some real clarity in uncertain times. So I would, if you are able, I would definitely recommend it. Have a look at it, and we'll send more details out once we've taken and started the registration for that. Okay, so I'll hang on the line just for a few minutes more, see if there's anything else coming in. Great stuff. Glad you enjoyed it and it's been helpful, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.